Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, big tech turns to Trump.
What they're trying to do is reframe Silicon Valley not as this land of these big monopolies that have this massive control over our lives, but is actually the land of startups.
A secret agenda to embed Silicon Valley into Trump's vision for America. I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take.
These people are some of the richest people in the world, some of the most powerful people in the world, and they want to be held up as, the kind of saints that they used to be treated as.
We speak to Paris Marx.
I host a podcast called Tech Won't Save Us, and I wrote Road to Nowhere, What Silicon Valley Gets Wrong About the Future of Transportation. And I'm coming to you from St. John's, Newfoundland today on the east coast of Canada.
Well, that sounds lovely. Paris, there are a million topics we could talk to you about, but today we're going to be talking to you about Silicon Valley and the Republican Party, and specifically Donald Trump. I think it's fair to say it's been a love-hate relationship over the years.
Twitter, run by CEO Jack Dorsey, saying after close review of the president's recent tweets, it banned him due to the risk of further incitement of violence.
The President Trump, has been banned indefinitely from Facebook and Instagram, and at least until the end of his presidency.
And Elon, I love Elon Musk. Do we love him? I love him.
But the relationship seems to be on an upswing with some big names in tech throwing their support behind the former president.
Billionaire CEO Elon Musk says he will donate to a new super PAC supporting former President Trump. According to a report from the Wall Street Journal, Musk has pledged to donate $45 million a month.
So what happened?
Yeah, so, we have seen these relationships between tech billionaires and Donald Trump for a while. People might remember back in 2016, Peter Thiel, who was a co-founder of PayPal and a co-founder of Palantir, which is, a big kind of surveillance company, and it processes a lot of surveillance data for, US government, but also many other intelligence agencies and governments and militaries around the world. So he publicly backed Donald Trump. He gave money to the Trump campaign. He spoke at the Republican National Convention and was kind of like a key intermediary between the Trump administration and Silicon Valley.
Fake culture wars only distract us from our economic decline. And nobody in this race is being honest about it except Donald Trump. Tonight, I urge all of my fellow Americans to stand up and vote for Donald Trump.
So that was back in 2016. And we saw, over a number of years, through that first Trump campaign, a lot of people in tech seem to be really turned off because of the nature of that administration. But since Biden's been back in power, we've certainly seen more of these powerful figures in the tech industry get closer and closer to Donald Trump. Through the kind of primary season and after the assassination attempt on July 13th, against Donald Trump, a lot of people in tech who were maybe soft on Trump or were supporting him but not saying so publicly have really come out and, really endorsed him publicly, like someone like Elon Musk has done, and started pledging money to his campaign and saying that they really hope that he will win.
Musk can do things that go far beyond just financial contributions. How do you think that he can use his ownership of X to help the campaign?
Yeah, it's quite significant, right? Because when Elon Musk took over Twitter or X or whatever we want to call it, he basically said that, it wasn't going to support a particular political position. It was going to be neutral, blah, blah, blah. We saw that really evaporate very quickly as Elon Musk's own very right-wing politics have developed through his own engagement with that platform. Twitter or X, which is owned by Elon Musk, has unbanned Donald Trump. Trump does not actually post there at the moment. But the way that Elon Musk has kind of changed the platform, it exists in such a way that right-wing voices are often elevated and pushed in a way that didn't happen to the same degree in the past. People will remember back in 2016, and in the couple of years after that, people were talking a lot about the influence of, say, Facebook ads on helping to shape people's preferences and who they were voting for. Some of that stuff was disputed, how much of an impact it really had, but it does seem quite clear that on the Facebook side with Mark Zuckerberg, he is allowing Trump to go back on those platforms, removing restrictions on him. We saw Twitch, which is owned by Amazon, do the same thing quite recently.
Yeah. One of the big questions this summer was who Donald Trump was going to pick for his vice president. There was this Veep stakes, right? And everyone was wondering, where would he go with this, right? You had some thought he might pick Tim Scott, which would maybe attract African-American voters. Maybe Marco Rubio would attract Latino voters. But he ended up picking J.D. Vance, which in a sense sort of doubled down on this tech bro demographic, right? J.D. Vance, how did he become such a darling for these Silicon Valley types?
The story goes that over a decade ago, Peter Thiel spoke at Yale Law School, where J.D. Vance was, basically getting a degree. And he heard Peter Thiel speak, and that had a significant impact on him. Since then, J.D. Vance has talked about how Peter Thiel influenced his kind of conversion and embrace of Christianity, along the lines of how Peter Thiel understood Christianity.
I believe in the resurrection of Christ. I think that
the bodily resurrection.
The bodily resurrection of Christ. So I think that's the central miracle, I think that there is a way in which it gives us an understanding of the world. I think that it is...
Because, of course, again, we think of Silicon Valley as this very secular place, but there are still some very religious people there, and Peter Thiel is one of them. But then alongside that, I think if anybody knows anything about J.D. Vance before, say, a week ago, it was that he was the author of this book, Hillbilly Elegy, that became very popular, that had a movie made about it that is often available on Netflix. He came from the Midwest. He joined one of Peter Thiel's venture capital firms.
That's so interesting. I think that's something that the media kind of got wrong about this J.D. Vance pick. I think it was easy to say, oh, this is a way to tap into that forgotten Appalachia, rural America element because he wrote this book. But really, Trump's probably thinking this is a way to tap into those very powerful figures like Peter Thiel, Andreessen Horowitz, that can bring lots of money, lots of influence.
Exactly. And later, J.D. Vance founded his own venture capital firm, which received over $100 million from Peter Thiel. And in 2022, of course, Vance won a seat in the Senate, and Peter Thiel contributed $15 million to his campaign, basically bankrolled his campaign to get him in the Senate. And he would not be in the place that he is today if it were not for Peter Thiel.
After the break, what Silicon Valley wants out of a second Trump term. Let's talk about some of your reporting. You've written that Silicon Valley has a dangerous plan for the Trump-Vance administration.
A growing number of tech elites voicing their support for the Trump-Vance ticket, including two of the most influential names in Silicon Valley.
One that's been put actually in writing recently by venture capitalist Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz.
The future of our business, the future of technology, new technology, and the future of America is literally at stake with some of these, I just say really misguided and difficult policies.
So what does this plan look like?
You mentioned Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, who are very prominent venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. And so these two people have come out and said that they will also be giving money to the Trump campaign, and in particular to the super PAC that Elon Musk has set up in order to, try to get Donald Trump elected, because they very clearly see that Trump being elected would be in their personal interests and their professional interests. And so they've called this thing the little tech agenda. And what they're trying to do is reframe Silicon Valley not as this land of these big monopolies that have this massive control over our lives, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Apples of the world, but is actually the land of startups, right? Mm-hmm. And that every action they take is about promoting startups and helping startups. And so that is what this policy proposal is all about. And so what we see in there is they're very angry about the fact that the Biden administration has floated this proposal to tax unrealized capital gains to try to get billionaires to pay more tax.
Biden says he'll increase taxes in other areas to bring in more money for the government.
If you want to make or can make a million or millions of bucks, that's great. Just pay your fair share in taxes.
So they're very angry about that. They're also angry about the fact that the Biden administration and the various regulators have been doing a lot more regulatory enforcement and investigation, and even stopping some mergers and acquisitions that have been happening. And they, of course, don't want to see that happen, because that is part of where they make their money. Major tech companies buying these startups, these smaller companies, is where a lot of these venture capitalists basically cash out, right? where they get their return on their investment. And so the bigger picture there then is that they want to see deregulation of traditional industries that the tech industry has not been able to move into so far, things like the healthcare industry. And what they really want to see removed is things like environmental regulations, regulations that protects patients and the public, so that they can move in and try to make money in these industries that they have been sort of kept out of.
I want to just dig a little deeper on this little tech idea, because some of your reporting, one of the reasons I like your reporting is you point out just how Orwellian the idea of little tech feels at the same time while AI is big companies like Microsoft are swallowing these little companies whole. Do you want to address that?
Certainly. So as we've been seeing the past few years, the US government and certainly European regulators and some others around the world have been looking a lot more into the competition issues, doing antitrust investigations into these massive tech companies because they are some of the largest companies in the world. And so what we've been seeing right now is, on the one hand, startups are not as powerful or as plentiful in Silicon Valley as they used to be because these major dominant tech companies are so large. They need the computational resources that these major tech companies have. And so the idea that there is really much of a startup ecosystem, or that it's not wholly reliant on these major tech companies in order to operate, is just it's not true. And what you see in that document, this little tech agenda that Andreessen and Horowitz have put together, is basically an admission of that, right? They're trying to position it as, we're for startups and not for big tech. But a lot of the things that they're campaigning for are things that would really benefit major tech companies over everyone else.
Right.
And as I was saying, one of those is the right of these tech companies to be able to buy as many startups as they want. This does not sound like a pro-startup kind of initiative. It sounds like, okay, it's an initiative that would further allow these major tech companies to buy up nascent competition to cement their dominance, right? But it would make investors money when they do that.
We've seen from recent hearings over the possible banning of TikTok, for example, that US lawmakers don't really have the strongest grasp on tech policy. We're going into a world where tech companies have fortunes of nation states, armies of lobbyists in Washington. Doesn't it seem like they're already winning the anti-regulation game without Trump?
Oh, I think so, yes.
Right?
I think they massively overstate the degree to which the government is really successfully kind of penalizing them or stopping them from doing whatever they want to do, right? But the thing is, I think it's more of a rhetorical shift that they are pushing back against, right? Because if you think about a lot of the 2010s, the whole atmosphere around tech was, these are innovators. They're making the world a better place. Everything is great because of the tech industry in Silicon Valley and these founders and blah, 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 right? And then we moved into the late 2010s and the early 2020s. And what we had was a lot more critical reporting on what the tech companies were doing, a lot more kind of vocal criticism of the tech founders themselves. And of course, the government, especially as the Biden administration took over, doing a lot more investigations of these tech companies and their business models. So on the one hand, it's that piece of it. But then they also know that if a Trump administration comes in, that they will have a lot more influence over the policy levers that it will be pulling, and that they can basically guarantee that, Trump did those massive tax cuts when he was in office from 2016 through to 2020 that really benefited people like those in Silicon Valley. And they do not want to see that reversed. And, ideally, they would like to see it even lower. And then on top of that, you also see companies like, say, Elon Musk's companies increasingly coming in for scrutiny around their labor practices, around their environmental practices, whether it's Tesla factories releasing a lot of pollutants and breaching clean air limits. And so they do not want to see regulatory scrutiny of those sorts of things increasing. They want to ensure that they can do whatever they want.
And maybe that helps explain how somebody like Elon Musk, who runs Tesla, the biggest EV company in the world, can support a candidate who is running explicitly against electric vehicles.
Yeah, it was funny, actually. The other day, Trump was giving a speech at one of his rallies, and it was after this news came out that Elon Musk was supposedly giving him $45 million a month. And, he had been railing against EVs before that. And then in this speech, he was kind of saying, this guy Elon Musk, he's pretty good. He's giving me all this money. He didn't even tell me. I just saw it in the news. And, he's making these EVs. They're not all bad.
And I'm constantly talking about electric cars, but I don't mean I'm against. I'm totally for them. But whatever the market says, and if it's 10% of the market, 12%, 7%, 20%, whatever it is, it's okay. But you can't have 100% electric cars.
So it's interesting to see like those shifts in rhetoric now because he sees that all this money is coming from someone like Elon Musk. But we've even seen like Musk's rhetoric changing too, right? He has in recent years said that he doesn't see climate change as existential of an issue as he used to think it was. But the other piece of it too is as you accumulate money, as you become some of the richest people in the world, your political instincts also tend to change as well, right?
And I just want to give a little balance here. So I wonder, there are big names who are not supporting Trump. Can you kind of talk about who some of them are and which side is winning?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that the Republican side certainly gets a lot more attention. In particular, we see, you know, I think one of the most prominent supporters of the Democrats in Silicon Valley is someone like Reid Hoffman, who is one of the co-founders or founder of LinkedIn.
LinkedIn co-founder and big Democratic donor Reid Hoffman is throwing his support behind Kamala Harris. Hoffman now joins what's become a tidal wave of donations supporting the vice president, from Democratic grassroots up to the mega party donors, also including...
And so he has been supporting the campaign. He recently had like a conversation with Peter Thiel at this billionaire retreat that happens somewhere in the mountains in like, you know, the middle of the US. I can't remember. I think it's like Idaho or something. And they kind of got into a back and forth because, you know, Hoffman does not have the cleanest record either. He has funded disinformation campaigns in places like Alabama in order to try to help candidates that he wants to see supported. So, you know, it's not like he's the most perfect person in the world, but he's a major Democratic supporter and a vocal one, which I think is important. And someone like Reed Hastings as well, who was previously at Netflix, but left there quite recently, you know, was there from the early days. He is also a supporter of the Democratic Party, a major donor, but he was also one of the people who was saying that he was pausing his donations until Joe Biden stepped aside. I think that this is actually going to disrupt some of the momentum that was behind the Trump campaign. And I think that he was almost certain to win in November if Biden stayed there. I think that that becomes a much more open question now that Kamala Harris has moved in there. And I think it will reinvigorate some of that Democratic support that has probably gone quiet in Silicon Valley, you know, in recent months.
Yeah, a lot of this support came in at Trump's highest possible moment and Biden's lowest possible moment. Maybe these guys committed the cardinal sin of venture capital, which is to buy at the peak.
Yeah, I think it might be true, you know? If you think about someone like Elon Musk in particular, who, you know, really went fully behind Donald Trump, who, you know, we had these stories that he was reportedly committing $45 million a month to his campaign. You know, now he says that that figure is not accurate. I would not be surprised if he starts to get cold feet at some point in the next month or two.
Yeah.
And withdraws some of that, right?
So why don't we wrap up by just talking a little bit about the stakes, the final question. What happens if they get their way? Trump wins and he basically says, you guys can do whatever you want.
Yeah, it's an important question, I think. And I would like to say that I think we probably overestimate the difference that we would actually see between a Democratic administration and a Republican one, right? Because what we've seen under Joe Biden is, in many cases, a continuation of a lot of Trump policies and a lot of Republican policies. In particular, you know, this conflict with China has only been accelerated. We have been seeing in the past few years this increasing tension between the United States and China as the United States' geopolitical role has been diminishing, its kind of global hegemony. And it has these rising forces like China and Russia, for example, that are vying for power and control in their own kind of spheres of influence. And so Silicon Valley has really taken advantage of that to present themselves as being key to maintaining American hegemony through the 21st century. They say that America's military might, its economy, and its technological supremacy were key to hegemony in the 20th century. And, you know, those things need to be maintained if it's going to have hegemony in the 21st century. So that means that the United States government needs to give a lot more defense contracts to tech companies in their eyes, but also that the United States needs to see Silicon Valley as being key to its position in the world. And if it is going to maintain its hegemony, you know, it needs to work a lot more with Silicon Valley. It needs to allow Silicon Valley to shape a lot more of what it's doing. And I think regardless of the administration, we're going to see movements in that direction. But I do think that the Trump administration would move much more aggressively and think much less about the broader consequences of doing those sorts of actions than a Democratic administration might. And that's not to, you know, provide a big endorsement of the Democrats either.
All right, Paris Marx reporting from the wild coasts of Newfoundland. Thank you for coming on The Take.
Absolutely. Great to speak with you.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Marcos Bartolomé and Veronique Eshaya, with Duha Mossad, Khaled Soltan, Manahil Naveed, and me, Kevin Hirten, in for Malika Bilal. It was edited by Alexandra Locke. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Joe Plord mixed this episode. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.